The usage factor is aimed to be something in between the impact factor that we all know, love, hate, know is there and know we have to pay attention to, and alt metrics that are new and all-pervasive, the metrics that we need to harvest from everywhere. Somewhere in the middle is a different measure. It's a measure that says, how many times has this article been downloaded from a website, so that we can see across a range of different journals, how much are they used. It isn't trying to make any kind of value judgment of what that means. It's designed to give the reader, the librarian, the buyer, the editor even, another measure to put against the impact factor and the alt metrics, which are really probably, I would say, more at the article level. So who will benefit from this? I think authors will benefit because they will have a different measure. The impact factor, we know, has been around a long time, but it doesn't cover all journals. It doesn't cover, in a way it gives you a measure in one particular area of how your journal stacks up against other journals. But there are many disciplines that are really not that well represented in the ISI impact factor ranks, and many, many journals that don't make it at all. So, and particularly if you're a librarian and you want to have some measure of should I buy or index this new journal, and that really applies to open access journals as well as peer-reviewed, I don't mean peer-reviewed, I mean subscribed to journals. If you have a new title and you want to get some assessment of is it being used, you can't go to the ISI impact factor because it's not going to have one for the first few years. So authors and publishers are going to benefit from having another measure that will be available almost immediately, certainly within the first 2 years. Librarians will have a different measure they can use. They can be able to rely on it because it's going to be counter compliant, it's going to be audited by counter. And research funding agencies can also track how their research is being downloaded. So we see this as being an alternative to the impact factor, not better or worse, but just different. So the goals of the project were really, it started back in 2007, and we've gone through a number of different ways of really trying to make sure that it's going to be accepted and that it would work, basically. So the objectives are to find out if it's statistically significant, and is it statistically significantly different from the impact factor? Because if it was going to tell you exactly the same, then really is it worth the effort? Will it be accepted? Will librarians actually pay attention to it once we actually get it up and running? Is it going to be credible, robust? And actually, can we put together an organization that can make it work? Because this isn't going to be relying on then selling the results of the impact factor, so there won't be a revenue stream in that way. So we need to find a way of actually making sure that it's efficient to collect the data and then feed it back to people to use in whichever way they like. So we spent a lot of time in stage 1 and 2 of the project collating a lot of data from web logs and across a wide range of journals, and trying to analyze through the cyber group in London what was a statistically meaningful measure of usage. And there's a report I can share with anybody who's interested afterwards. There is a report that goes into a lot of data and detail about how they did the analysis and why they came up with these recommendations. But I pulled out for you here the ones that I think are the most important and the most interesting. The important thing about coming up with one number to represent downloads across an entire journal is that it needs to be the median and not the arithmetic mean. I'm not a statistician, so probably there are others in the room who would understand this better, but it's much, much less likely to be gained if it's a median. We think there's an opportunity to publish a range of usage factors for different types of content across a journal. There's quite a bit of debate within the advisory board about how useful this is going to be, but it would be possible to have a usage factor for primary research, for news, for reviews, for case reports if it's a medical journal. You could take one usage, we believe every journal should have one base usage factor for all its content. But then you could dice and slice the content within it. You could have a usage factor if a journal has multiple sections for different disciplines. you could have a usage factor for each section. It's really up to the publisher to decide how they wanted to do that. This is something, the third point here is something that we think is perhaps different from the way that, for example, the impact factor is published. We would like to see publishers publishing confidence levels around the number. How accurate is it likely to be that usage factor is going to be about right? We looked at different timescales, and the 24-month window seems to be the best. We're in the middle of testing at the moment 12 months as well as 24 months. The 24 months seems to be the most reliable measure, and again, the one that is least likely to be subject to gaming. And the other thing that is very clear if you look at the early data is that the usage factor is going to vary very much from discipline to discipline. And so in the same way that there are impact factor subject categories, there will need to be usage factor categories as well. Not because we have to have some kind of ranking, but if you do want to compare journals, it would not be fair to compare journals across widely different disciplines. So, what's this going to look like? This, the calculation of a usage factor basically is the median number of success, I would have to read this because otherwise I'll get it wrong. The median number of successful requests during the 2-year period, 2009-2010, published in the journal in that time period. So countable items are specific published items in the journal, and countable items are defined in the code of practice. As I mentioned earlier, different types of items could have different impacts and different usage factors. But for example, there could be one for full text articles, and that would be a specific usage factor. Thank you. So what we did in stages 1 and 2 was to get to the point of saying what would the usage factor be, how would we calculate it, and how would it work? And also, what kind of infrastructure would we need? We need to be able to somehow collate the data, extract it from our statistics that publishers are already producing, and then collate it into something meaningful. We need standards. We need a taxonomy to actually put journals into subject categories, and that was surprisingly much more difficult to come up with a taxonomy that everybody agreed to, or a classification that everybody was happy with. And the other thing that came out of the recommendations and came out of a lot of further discussion afterwards is that article version is important. So do you start measuring from when you put up a preprint, when you put up an article perhaps as a publisher head of print? Many journals put up the author-submitted version and then take that down, or perhaps put it behind, or suppress it when the first online first version comes out. And then there may be a second corrected online first version, then there will be a published version, and then maybe an amended version. So where do you start the clock? And what do you call all of those different versions? There are NISO recommended guidelines, and so we are recommending to publishers who want to create usage factors for their journals, calculate usage factors for their journals, that everybody uses these NISO guidelines. Otherwise, it's going to be it's going to be fairly difficult to measure. So we got to stage 3. So we're in the middle of stage 3 of the project at the moment. We started by publishing a draft code of practice, and that is on the Counter website. So if anybody would like to go and have a look at it, it is there. We decided that as part of stage 3, we had to come up with a subject classification, and we've explored a number of different options there. We have librarians on our advisory board who've been very, very helpful in helping us come up with that. We've looked at some options for infrastructure, for how we collate the numbers. We have started working with ABC Group on auditing the numbers as they come in, because we'll need publishers to create their numbers, but then they'll need to be audited, much the same way that counter reports are. And we also wanted to look at the feasibility of whether we could apply usage factors to other types of publications. We have done less well, I think, on the last point than we have on the others. So the code of practice I mentioned is on there, the definitions are there, the methodology is there, has very specific rules for how you report the usage factor. There's in the same way that the counter report has a template, it's the same for the usage factor. There are data processing rules, and we will have this option for auditing. So the scope of this last phase of the test is to look at these 12 and 24-month periods, to look at how small journals have to get before the usage factors look to be unstable in terms of being statistically significant. We want to look at the time periods. If publishers were able to give us multiple time periods, we wanted to look and see how variable the usage factor was for each 24-month time period. We wanted to start to collate some ideas about how people would try to game the system. Some of them fairly obvious ones, like an author standing there pressing the button on their article to boost their numbers. You can spot that very easily, and the median will cut that out anyway. But random robots pulling articles down, that kind of thing, that's the sort of thing that we need to see if we can identify and figure out how we can make sure to take account of it. The cyber group have been helping us in the data collection, consolidation, and actually analysing the data that we pulled in. We have come up with 200 journals across 27 different subject fields, 11 publishers, and 2 aggregators have all, plus some vendors, because if you think about it, a journal can be on the publisher's website, it could be with an aggregator, it can be on PubMed. We haven't been able to persuade PubMed or PubMed Central to give us their usage factor data, but we keep hoping. So we're trying to see how easy it is to pull in data from multiple sources, because obviously it's only fair that a journal can collate all of its usage. So the results so far, we have just completed the data compilation and delivery. We're a little bit late on that. And the analysis is ongoing at the moment. The first phase of analysis is about to be released by Cyber. We do think a fixed counting period is going to be important. We originally started by saying the publisher could decide when to start the clock. That doesn't look like that's going to work. We're going to have to set fixed time periods, I assume January 1 to end of December. 12 months and 24 months both look good, so maybe we choose just one. I'm not quite sure what the proposal is going to be there. The subject classification scheme, we actually decided to adopt the Ringgold scheme. Ringgold have spent quite a lot of time creating a new subject classification. It worked very well for the 27 subject fields that we had in our original trial. And infrastructure issues. There was a lot of challenge in providing data. I'm talking it now with a provider hat on, both from an aggregator point of view and from a publisher point of view, providing the data in the right format when your systems haven't been set up to create data in that format proved to be much more difficult than we expected. And then aggregating data is actually not as easy as we had thought it might be. Cyber are working on that, so hopefully that piece will get better as we go on. So what were the challenges? Auditing the data, well, I'm not surprised. I mean, we struggled, certainly within Wolters Kluwer, to create the data in the format. We were contributing, I think, 20 journals across a range of disciplines, plus providing data for multiple publishers who had their journals on our Ovid aggregator database. So we had to provide data from a wide variety of journals. Everything had to be down to the article level, and actually creating usage data by article and be able to create all of the tags that the system needed to be able to pick that up and to audit it was actually much harder than we realized. And one publisher actually fell out of the study because they just couldn't produce the data in the format that was required. So I think it will take some re-engineering of all our systems in time, I think, to be able to report the data in the right format. But as we upgrade to Counter 4, then Counter 4 is actually incorporating some of these standards, particularly reporting at the article level. So I think things will get better going forward. Consolidation of data, I didn't see any of that. That was all done by cyber, but I imagine that must have been something of a challenge. And then consistent definition. I mean, if you can imagine across a range of publishers, I imagine in this room alone, there must be thousands of different ways you can describe a single article type. And that actually being able to collate any of that, to make any sense out of that, is going to be difficult. I said the subject classification was actually much more difficult to come up with than we had expected. We looked at about 10 different taxonomies that were available. Most of them focused on one particular area or were stronger in, say, science and engineering, or they would be strong in social sciences. There were very few schemes that we could find that really went across the entire breadth of scholarly publishing. So we ended up with the Ringgold system, at least as the proposal at the moment. Coming up with an economic model to support all of this, I think, is going to be a challenge. We haven't actually got to that bit. I say it's a challenge, it's still a challenge as far as I can see. So, what are we doing now? Having got to the end of stage 3, we've actually completed the trial. We know we can actually produce usage factors. Interestingly, I think some of the early ones I saw, some of the usage factors are going to be a very, very big number. So we're going to have what looks like huge impact factors, but they're not really. There'll be numbers in the hundreds and thousands. So they're very different from an impact factor, which is good, because I don't think there can be any chance of any confusion between the two kinds of numbers. We're in the process of setting up a governance structure for the usage factor. The usage factor is formally a part of Counter. Hazel Woodward and I are the co-chair of the project, but Peter Shepherd is the person who is driving it within Counter, and we need a governance structure which will be heavily influenced by librarians to help make sure that we stay very honest about the whole system and everybody can have confidence in it. I think the next step that's going to be very important is setting up the central registry and making sure that we're actually we're collating all of the data in the right way, and we have a really robust auditing system. And then once we've done all that, we'll be sending out invitations to as many publishers as we can find to start recording and reporting usage factors. So that step will hopefully happen sometime this year. Just wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the structure here. I mentioned Hazel and I. Peter, we have a very comprehensive international advisory board. And then in addition to that, we have a group of the publishers who have been taking part in the stage 3 of the trial. So if there's anybody here who's interested in taking part or getting involved, volunteering to help, we'd love to hear from you, because I'm sure we can find things for you to do. And just thanks to our sponsors, we've had a lot of sponsors along the way. This started very much as a UKSG project with RIN Network in the UK. Stage 2 was funded by a group of publishers, ALPSP as well. And then stage 3 was funded by an even wider group of people. And hopefully, stage 4 will be, we will go live. So, thank you very much.